I realize that the culture of techies is not necessarily to talk about their jobs or their income levels. And I understand they value their independence in the culture, but I think there is a valuable opportunity. I'll end and take some questions in a minute, but the other thing I wanted to just mention, in this atmosphere of debate and hostility towards the other, something that, as I've mentioned, is not unique to our times. We need to think more seriously, and this is where students come in, and people who study history and enjoy history, about our own histories, and about where we've come from, and why we've come, and where our parents came, and why they came. And I think that we'll find similarities and commonalities as much as we like to separate ourselves from the present day in our own histories. And so we need to think about our roots and what inspired people over the centuries to migrate to the US under different circumstances. When I was in the Philippines, speaking to Filipino workers there who were active in migrant rights organization, and as I mentioned, just about every Filipino has a connection to migration. I was speaking with a family there was a grandmother in the room who had moved back and forth as a nanny to Saudi Arabia. There was a man who had worked as a construction worker and also in the Middle East and was planning on returning the following week. And there were kids who fully expected, kids, I think something like between 8 and 12 years of age, who fully expected when I asked them to go abroad, to leave their families. That was sort of expected. And the mother and the father were active in a migrant rights organization with what, in my mind, was a memorable slogan. We dream of a society that will not be torn apart just for the need to survive. That really hit me, and that really affected me. And I think that that's a slogan, that sentiment is something that we should think about in the United States as we debate and discuss migration, what causes it, why people are here, and what to do about it, which I haven't, and I will talk about that maybe in the Q&A. But with the result being, with the goal being, in a worldwide, looking at it from a worldwide perspective, we dream of a society that will not be torn apart just for the need to survive. So I'm going to leave it there, and we can talk a little bit about solutions and other questions that we might have. You need to come to the microphone to ask questions, right?
So if we could ask you to come up to the microphone and just give your name and your affiliation and ask your question. I know my students have plenty of questions, right?
Good.
Got to break the ice.
Thank you for such a great talk. I'm an immigrant myself, so I can relate to some of the issues.
Where are you from?
Ukraine, actually. So I can relate to Poland, and I see a lot of my friends and my parents going back to Ukraine, which is not that great, but it happens. One of the questions I had for you was, if you put big players aside, the government and big businesses, and look at the immigrants are themselves making the decision, saying yes to migrate, and even though they know that they've been so-called traded, how can we come back to like the personal level to try to cut that supply line of them making the choice voluntarily? How do you educate them to stop doing it? Because we understand that they're doing it because they have to survive, but if they keep saying yes, no regulation in the government will stop them.
Right. That's a very good question. And it's not just a matter of education. It's a matter of the way we've decided to structure ourselves in our economy. We have built, and when I say we, the Western world, economies that are dependent on migrant workers. Bye-bye, thank you. Why have we done that? I mean, that's a rhetorical question, but we have done this. Why have we built societies that are dependent on migrants to do some of the most valuable work that we need to have done? Whether it's taking care of our sick or our elderly, whether it's picking our food. I mean, the idea, if you think about it, is kind of preposterous. That these guys in Georgia now, if you've read the news recently, because of the crackdown on immigration, say they can't find people to pick crops. I don't believe it. I mean, I think when they say that, what they really mean is we can't find people, what you don't see is the rest of the sentence, at the wages we offer to pick the crops. But why is it that we've constructed a society that is not sustainable without migrants? That's the discussion that also needs to take place, not just in the US, but bilaterally, multilaterally. We tend to think of migration as an issue that affects just us, and that Georgia can solve it with their migration policy, and that Arizona can solve the issue with their migration policy, or the broader, the United States can have an immigration policy. It doesn't make any sense. By its very nature, migration is an international issue. So if we're going to deal seriously with migration, there needs to be discussion about building sustainable countries, nations, and there needs to be bilateral and multilateral discussions about how we address this flow of people. Because wherever the opportunity is, as I said before, people are going to go for it. There's no way you're going to be able to keep them out.
Hey, come on, folks. I know my students have lots of questions. While they're coming up, go ahead and line up to the microphones. Let me go ahead and take the moderator's prerogative here.
Go ahead.
Ask you a question. You talked very briefly that you would want to talk about a little bit about the policy solutions. I think public policy. What are some of the solutions? Where do you think we've gone wrong, both in terms of policy debate and the policy solutions? And how, if you were in charge, what would you suggest?
Well, I go back to the issue I was just talking about, and that's the multilateral and the bilateral talks. It is interesting to me that before 9/11, there were ongoing conversations that seemed to be going someplace between the United States and Mexico. And discussions at the secretary level that actually got to the point where this is when Bush was the president of the United States and Vicente Fox was the president of Mexico. And after 9/11, those discussions fell apart completely. They not only didn't pursue the discussions that had already started taking place, they didn't pick up anymore. I was at a conference last week in Washington with a number of Mexican officials present, and they confirmed that there have been no talks about immigration between the United States and Mexico to their knowledge. To me, that's shocking. It's amazing that we're talking about the border, but we don't talk about the people in both nations who cross the border. So that's one place I would start. The other thing, too, as I said, we need to talk about human rights. We need to talk about building an economy that is sustainable. Again, I go back to what I was saying before. Why is it that we've built this economy that is not sustainable? We expect to have certain jobs done by migrants. So in a way, we have to raise the level of debate, discussion, and the expectations among people about what work is and what's honorable, and why workers need to be reasonably paid at all levels, particularly when they're doing valuable work. We've got to the point where we've decided amongst ourselves that it is dishonorable to work in the fields, to do the most valuable work of all, taking care of our elderly, taking care of our old people. Why don't we have pay structures that recognize the value of work? Why do we have a Department of Labor that has cut down on its enforcement of labor standards? If you wanted to immediately deal with the subject of migration so people were not exploited, you'd have a robust Department of Labor that enforced the labor laws. And under U.S. labor law, everyone's treated equally. When the labor law applies to everyone in terms of labor standards, working conditions, if those standards were adequately enforced so that American workers felt that they were entitled to and would be valued to decent wages and working conditions and standards, that would have an impact on immigration. A startling, I think, huge impact on immigration. I think if American workers went for those jobs, knowing that they'd be backed up by decent labor standards and enforcement. Other things that could be done. I mean, I think that, you know, I have questions about the brain drain. More and more companies are trying to get workers in at a time of rising unemployment in the United States. I don't understand that, but I do think if we're going to, we need to see ourselves much more as a global community, and if we are going to raid countries for their brains, we need to adequately compensate those countries. So if we're taking nurses away from the Philippines, we should pay the Philippines for those nurses. If we're taking high-tech workers away from their countries, those countries need to be compensated too. So we can look at the costs equitably. We have organizations that deal with trade, but there is no such thing as an international body that deals with migration, as amazing as that is. Why is that? I don't know. So we have to look at this issue on a global scale too, not just a national scale. So those are some of the things that at least I would start. And not a catchy soundbite, so it's hard for a politician to say that. It's much easier to say, let's shoot those guys at the border or electrify the fence. But that's the sad state of debate. Yes?
I really like the emphasis you keep on curing the cause rather than curing the symptom. And I like to understand how much percentage of your understanding the people in the powerhouse understood, like seeing the bigger picture, why people really know. So,
I'm not sure I understand the question. Do people understand the bigger picture?
Yeah, the people in the powerhouse who make policies, do they really understand that their policies are not acting on the cause rather than the symptom?
Yeah, I don't know what they understand, but I think that people act, and certainly politicians act, because of the various interests that they feel they have to, who they have to act on behalf of. And I don't think anyone really is looking at the larger picture, simply because when you look at the various interest groups, you've got to kind of, the idea is to cater to those, for politicians. And the reason I don't think we've moved beyond where we have is that you've got to put an issue in a soundbite. You've got to cater to the people who are paying you, who are contributing money, whether that's an ethnic group on the one hand, or whether that's the high-tech consortium on the other. So the idea of problem solving